Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Daybreak, no announcement yet on the next nominee for Prime Minister. The nomination will spark a sweeping cabinet reshuffle as President Park looks to push ahead with her reform drive. South Korea's chief nuclear envoy flies to Beijing today for talks with his Chinese counterpart as diplomacy continues to restart the long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization. Plus, the Korean won rallies to its strongest level in nearly 6 years. Analysts say continued strengthening could wreak havoc on Korea's export-driven economy. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Tuesday, June 10th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom and you're tuned in to Daybreak. Our top story this morning, despite speculation to the contrary, Monday came and went with no announcement on the next Prime Minister nominee. Looking to avoid further embarrassment after a first candidate withdrew over previous ethical lapses, President Park Geun-hye is said to be running a fine-tooth comb over the potential candidates. Choi You-sun starts us off.
President Park is thought to be seeking a reform-minded figure with ethical integrity to be her next prime minister.
국가 개혁의 적임자로 국민들께서 요구하고 있는 분을 찾고 있습니다.
Nearly 2 weeks after her first nominee, Ahn Dai-hee, resigned amid controversy over privileges he received after retiring as a Supreme Court justice, the president has yet to announce her new pick. It's believed the presidential office has tightened its personnel verification system. When asked Monday if the nomination process is back to square one, spokesperson Min Kyung-wook said that the verification process could be a variable. The announcement will likely come no later than this week, since President Park is scheduled to leave for Central Asia next Monday. To avoid a further delay in the anticipated cabinet reshuffle, there's speculation that the nominee, before being confirmed at a hearing, could play a part in recommending a new cabinet to the president alongside current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won. With the replacement of the presidential press secretary over the weekend, a reshuffle within the presidential office may be gaining momentum. On Saturday, the spokesperson said it was not certain which senior secretaries were subject to replacement, but that a verification process was indeed underway and new names would soon be announced. After the departure of one of the president's closest aides and former press secretary Lee Jung-hyun, observers are now focusing on whether Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun will also step down. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
Now, political parties here in Korea are gearing up to make good on their reform pledges after last week's local elections ended in a virtual draw. Over the coming weeks, the ruling party will select a new party leader and prepare for by-elections at the end of July. And these polls have taken on much greater significance given last week's stalemate. Ji Myung-gil reports.
With the campaigning over and the races decided, the ruling Saenuri Party and main opposition party now face a slew of challenges ahead. The ruling party plans to establish a new committee to reform the government's overall management system in the wake of April's ferry disaster.
We expect a new prime minister and new cabinet members. To coincide with President Park Geun-hye's upcoming reshuffle, our party is considering plans to restructure itself.
The Saenuri Party will also hold a party convention on July 14th to nominate a new leader. Meanwhile, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy also said it would do its best to regain the public's trust.
After the June 4th local elections, what people want is social integrity, a system of checks and balances, and a safer Korea. We will work towards answering the public's demands.
Both parties will also be trying to rally the troops ahead of July 30th by-elections. They are considered important as the number of National Assembly seats up for grabs could be as high as 18. 10 former lawmakers gave up their assembly badges to run in local elections, while 2 lawmakers lost seats for violating election laws. More seats could be available as lawmakers are awaiting rulings on other charges. Political analysts say the outcome of the by-elections could serve as another barometer of public sentiment on the heels of the local elections. The ruling party currently holds 149 seats in parliament and needs just 1 more seat to resume its majority status at the 300-member National Assembly. 김영길, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea has recently opened up talks of a diplomatic and trade nature with 3 of its neighbours, namely Japan, Russia and China. This, coupled with Seoul's chief nuclear envoy heading to Beijing for talks on this Tuesday, is raising hope for the resumption of the long-stalled multinational dialogue on North Korea's denuclearization. Hwang Sang-hee has this report.
A flurry of diplomatic activity by North Korea is changing the landscape of the 6-party nuclear talks. The multilateral dialogue, consisting of the 2 Koreas, the United States, China, Japan and Russia, has been stalled since December 2008. However, North Korea has recently agreed with Japan to open a reinvestigation into the fate of Japanese citizens abducted by the North in the 1970s and 80s. In return, Tokyo promised to lift its individual sanctions on Pyongyang, which could reduce the regime's economic dependence on Beijing. China, as the chair of the 6-party talks and North Korea's biggest economic benefactor, plays a key role in efforts to bring the North back to the negotiating table. Russia has also been moving rapidly to cozy up with North Korea in response to the West's sanctions stemming from the Ukraine crisis. For Pyongyang, this relationship means another opportunity to gain leverage over its dependence on China. And experts say it opens up a chance for dialogue.
Russia and North Korea's mending ties are an appropriate step toward the resumption of dialogue, because Moscow could convince Pyongyang to return to the 6-party talks.
And while some experts doubt the validity of the 6-party format as a solution to North Korea's nuclear ambitions, most agree that having some form of communication with the communist state is much better than having no communication at all. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Human rights is an area where dialogue is out of the question for Pyongyang. North Korea has threatened to, quote, ruthlessly punish anyone involved in a UN field office that's set to open in South Korea later this year. Pyongyang's committee in charge of inter-Korean issues says the office, which will investigate the North's human rights violations, is a hideous, politically motivated provocation and a scheme plotted by Washington and Seoul. The committee goes on to deny any rights violations by the regime. After releasing a report detailing Pyongyang's crimes against humanity in February, the UN announced last month that it will run a field office in Seoul to further monitor the situation in the north. Japan continues to lay claims to the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island in the EC, threatening to take the case to the International Court of Justice. But it turns out Japan thought the issue was not worth taking to the ICJ in the early 1960s. In a secret report from 1962, Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the Dokdo issue cannot be categorized as an international dispute as it arose before Japan announced its compulsory jurisdiction over the island in 1958. The document, which was made public by a civic group in Japan, added that territorial disputes only apply between countries that claim compulsory jurisdiction. But since Korea did not, it said the Dokdo issue cannot be deemed a territorial dispute.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
The trials for the sunken Soho ferry's captain and crew members will begin this Tuesday afternoon. The Gwangju District Court says the first trial for Captain Lee Jun-sok and 14 crew members will start at 2 p.m. Korea time. The captain and 3 other senior crew members are charged with murder with willful negligence. They were among the first people to get off the ferry and they made no attempt to help passengers evacuate. On this first day of the trial, prosecutors and the defence will lay out their positions and apply for evidence to be examined. The key focus is on whether the captain and the 3 other crew members will be found guilty of the most serious charges. Most of the crew partially admit to negligence. Now, in economic news, we can count Moodys Investors Service among those that think the Korean economy is well on the path to recovery. The international credit ratings agency said Monday that Asia's 4th largest economy will grow by at least 3.5% this year and the next on the back of strong exports. Moodys, however, tempered the expectations a bit, saying Korea's heavily indebted public sector and households may have a negative impact on the domestic economy. It added Korea's aging population could also weigh on the longer-term potential growth rate. And the Korean won rallied to its strongest level against the US dollar in nearly 6 years on Monday. Analysts say the trend comes at a bad time, especially because Korea's exports to major economies, China in particular, are already suffering. Our Na Hyung-kyung has this report.
The European Central Bank's easing of monetary policy has driven the Korean won to strengthen even more. On Monday, the local currency rose 0.4% from the previous trading day to close at 1,016 won against the greenback. Experts say this is not a positive development for local exporters.
I think that $1 exchange rate has reached its threshold, with the ECB lowering its benchmark interest rate. The euro is likely going to join the weakening currency trend of the Japanese yen and Chinese yuan. Those will bring down the price competitiveness of Korean exporters even further.
With the Korean won also hitting its highest level against the yuan in nearly 3 years on Monday, analysts add the strengthening trend will send jitters to Korean exporters, especially because shipments to China are slowing. Korea's exports to China fell by more than 9% in May from a year earlier, and things are not likely to improve if the won continues to rise. As for the possibility of the won strengthening past the psychologically important 1,001 mark before the end of September, analysts in Seoul have mixed opinions. Many are not denying the likelihood, but they also suggest the local currency will weaken in the 4th quarter, given that the U.S. economy is on a path of recovery, which could lead the Federal Reserve to raise its key interest rate and strengthen the dollar. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Now, in another opinion on the outlook for Korea's growth, lots of people have an opinion, but the state-run think tank says that while the Korean economy is regaining its footing gradually, the recent Soho ferry disaster continues to keep domestic consumption dragged down. The Korea Development Institute said in its monthly report on Monday that the nation's major economic indicators, including investment and exports, suggest a moderate pace of recovery, but it added that sectors related to the arts, sports and recreational activities have weakened significantly since the ferry disaster. Last month, the think tank cut its growth outlook for this year by 0.2 percentage points to 3.7%, citing a drop in private consumption. Now to some cultural news, and violinist Jung Kyung-hwa is one of Korea's musical legends. And our cultural reporter Park Geun-hye was very lucky to have the chance to sit with her for a chat, and they talked about her 5 decades in the classical music business.
Korean classical music legend Jung Kyung-hwa, who has been leading a successful career spanning nearly 50 years, recalls her first encounter with the violin.
What I loved about the violin when I started when I was 6 was the freedom. I felt that the instrument was very intimate, and it also presented a voice. And so from then on, it became very pure fascination for me.
Since winning the Levantree competition in 1967 at the age of 19, she has become one of the world's first Asian classical musicians to reach star status on the global stage. She also shared part of her music career in the Chung Trio, along with her sister cellist Chung Myung-hwa and brother maestro conductor Chung Myung-hoon.
I had a very, very busy career until I had 2 children. I was very lucky to have this active career as a young performer.
She's been hailed by fans and music critics alike for her passionate yet delicate playing that could resonate with almost any period of classical music, from Bach and Beethoven to modern composers like Stravinsky. She says her Guarnerius violin, which she acquired in 1983, is her voice.
This instrument is so human. Once I've been in touch with Guarnerius, there is nothing that comes closer to my soul than this instrument.
In 2005, she suffered a finger injury. Thinking her violin playing days were over, she began teaching at Juilliard and co-directing the Great Mountains Music Festival. By 2010, her finger healed, allowing her to fully return to playing on international stages and in charity concerts, such as the one she will perform at the Seoul Arts Center this Friday.
I started as a dream of having a big solo career, but it's not a single voice I am looking for now. It is harmonious voice. Unless we care for each other and find the voice of each other and tune it together, we will not find the harmony.
In addition to her China tour in October, Chung will also play at the Royal Festival Hall in London on December 2nd, on the stage where her international career took off. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this morning. For that, we connect to our Eunice Kim, who's standing by at the news centre. Good morning, Eunice.
Good morning, Mark. Operations at Jinnah International Airport in Karachi have resumed after yesterday's terror attack that shook the country, leaving at least 28 people killed. Among the dead were the 10 gunmen who stormed the major airport in suicide vests around midnight Sunday night, facing off with security personnel for some 5 hours. The gunmen were also equipped with machine guns, grenades, and a rocket launcher. The Pakistani Taliban has officially claimed responsibility for the deadly assault in revenge for the death of a former Taliban leader by a U.S. drone strike last November. The highly coordinated attack was their largest strike on a state security complex. In the end, Pakistani authorities say all 10 militants were killed and at least 1 aircraft was destroyed. 14 others were injured. The airport was reopened for business as early as 2:30 in the afternoon local time. Iraq continues to be beset with violence. Monday's series of strikes in the country took at least 40 lives, the worst of which targeted Kurdish political party offices in northern Iraq. 22 people died in the double bombings, according to authorities, when 2 truck bombs were detonated one after the other, dealing a blow against bystanders who rushed in following the first explosion. No one has so far claimed responsibility for Monday's attacks, but an al-Qaeda splinter group, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, said they were behind double bombings on Sunday against Kurdish offices, which killed 19 people. Energy representatives from Russia, Ukraine, and the European Commission met in Brussels on Monday to find a solution on the gas crisis that has left Kiev's future in terms of its gas deliveries in limbo. Also on the agenda was the issue of the South Stream gas pipeline, the construction of which was suspended by Bulgaria on Sunday. Moscow believes the decision came under strong pressure from Brussels and Washington and has accused the European Union of, quote, creeping economic sanctions. The South Stream pipeline, a project run by Russia's Gazprom, would transport gas to Western Europe via the Balkans, avoiding Ukraine. And finally, are we closer to that time when computers and humans are indistinguishable? A supercomputer in London has succeeded in convincing its human test subjects into thinking it was 13-year-old Eugene Gutzman, becoming the first machine to pass the iconic Turing test. The Royal Society in central London said Gutzman was successful in fooling 1/3 of its judges that it was human in text-based conversations.
And a good Tuesday morning to you all as we kick things off in the LPGA, where Park Geun-hye, after winning her first LPGA title of the season over the weekend, has her eyes set on that #1 LPGA ranking once again. Despite the amazing victory at the Manulife Financial LPGA Classic and Stacey Lewis finishing tied for 8th place, it wasn't enough for the South Korean to retake the #1 ranking. However, she's not too far back as she has a chance to take that title back after the U.S. Women's Open, which will take place next week. Meanwhile, Lydia Ko looks to close in on the top spot as well as she finished just ahead of Lewis at 7th place over the weekend. And that's shifting over to football, where the South Korean national football team will be facing off against Ghana in less than 2 hours now in their final tune-up match before heading over to Brazil. With just over a week to go until Korea faces off against Russia in their first group stage match, manager Hong Myung-bo looks to finalize his starting lineup with the final tune-up match against Ghana. And the match looks to be quite challenging, especially with Ghana being led by players like Michael Essien and Kevin Prince Boateng, but fans will continue to cheer on, hoping for some motivation going into the big tournament. And now over to the K-League Classic this time, as Pohang Steelers' Lee Myung-ju is headed over to the UAE on a record-breaking transfer fee. The 24-year-old who won the Rookie of the Year honors last season is headed over to Al Ain in the UAE for the record-breaking transfer fee of $5 million. Lee Myung-ju also agreed to a 3-year deal, which will pay him $1.5 million per season, as the transfer fee shatters the previous record when Ki Sung-young was sold to Celtic for $3.6 million back in 2009. And over to the KBO this time, where Park Byung-ho of the Nexen Heroes is having a season to remember, and it's only June. Well, it's because he's on pace to break the KBO single-season home run record held by Lee Seung-yup. Now, so far after 55 games, the Nexen Heroes slugger has hit 26 home runs so far, leading the league by 9 home runs. Although most of those home runs were hit in Mukdong Stadium, a ballpark notorious for having a shorter fence, it doesn't take away the fact that he's still on pace to break that single-season home run record of 56, held by Lee Seung-yup of the Samsung Lions. And now finishing things off with Game 2 of the NBA Finals between the San Antonio Spurs and the Miami Heat. The AC wasn't broken this time, and LeBron James didn't have cramps, which meant Miami had a good chance of tying up the series. And they did just that as they rallied back in this game, despite the Spurs controlling the game for most of the first half. But with LeBron James coming back healthy after that leg cramp in Game 1, he scores 35 points in just over 37 minutes as Miami tied the series up at 1 apiece with a 98-96 victory. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your weather update. Clouds will stick around all day long with a chance of showers returning to the forecast for late in the afternoon and possibly into tomorrow. Showers will start from the upper regions, then gradually spread to other areas. And on and off rain will continue until the middle of the week due to atmosphere instability, and rain will accompanied by thunder and lightning. And for today, we're expecting 5 to 40 millimeters of rainfall across the nation. So close the window before heading out for the day, and nation will notice much cooler readings, highs in the low to mid 20s. So let's take a closer look at those numbers. The low in Seoul is starting out at 20, then the high will rise to 27, while Daegu tops out at 24, and Gwangju and Busan should climb to 28 and 22 later on. Now for other regions, down on Jeju should see a high of 23, Daejeon and Dokdo will reach 28 and 19, while Mount Keungang tops out at 14. Well, that's all for now, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Jion. And those are stories we have for you at this hour. But Korea Today is coming up in about half an hour's time, so there'll have plenty more news for you. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.